Cool. And of course, that immediately makes my phone ring. That's about how that works. Great. Well, it's good to have everybody here today. Just as a bit of background, especially because I know that we've actually had a lot of new members to the Clubhouse lately who might not kind of know who we are and what we're doing. I'm Whitney Kippis. I'm one of the co-founders of BidBoss. My other co-founder is on her last day of parenting leave, so she'll be back with us on Monday, but I want to make sure that she's taking the full breadth of the time that she has. So I've also got Allison here, who's one of my colleagues, who's been helping with a lot of the boss to boss cohorts and getting everything set up as we've migrated. So as a bit of background, I actually, both Sarah Jane and I both came out of full-time business development roles. We were both serving on teams with nonprofits and just constantly burning through people on our team a little bit. There were a lot of folks that just really, really struggled with that burnout aspect. And part of what we wanted to do with eventually quitting and starting our own little consulting business was have a sense of a bit of better balance, but also really focusing on the idea that we could continue to build community within this like inherently competitive world. So much of it is about like just bumping into each other and not necessarily building like relationships that kind of continue over time. So that's a big part of where both the Clubhouse and our like boss to boss communities have kind of built out from there. So the Clubhouse is this like online free platform. Great. Y'all have seen it. We're building out a lot of resources there, and there's a lot of information about jobs, information about kind of best practices and standards. And we're kind of continually building that platform. You'll see some courses coming soon as well, particularly about color team reviews that I'm very excited about. Since that'll include a lot of behind the scenes of what we've seen working with like 50 different international development organizations at this point. So I think it's going to be really useful, and it's been really fun to develop. The boss to boss cohorts are kind of like the flip side of that side of our work, because we know that a big part of this is that it's really challenging to kind of get a look at what other organizations are doing and understand kind of how they're navigating their day-to-day, because so much of this information is held really close to the chest. A lot of it's really private and can be kind of your competitive know-how. And we know that I don't actually think there is a way for an organization to steal another organization's trade secrets, just because so much of it is in the implementation of, right? So we wanted to create a community where individuals could really build trust with other folks that are kind of like them, dealing with similar situations, navigating similar challenges. And the cohorts are essentially that. So we started with piloting the solo and small business team cohort about 6 months ago now, I think. And it's been really great, especially for those folks that are on business development teams where they've got like not very many people to bounce ideas off of, not many people to like hold the fort together while things are really challenging. And it's been a really good opportunity for us to kind of test that out and kind of pilot this initiative. The biggest value that we actually saw people get out of it, and there are like a lot of different benefits, I can send you to the actual information later. But the biggest piece is actually that like you're not going through all of these challenges by yourself. And that has been, I think, the biggest thing that we've learned. And with that cohort-based model, I think it gives you really the opportunity to get to know people really well, build those connections in a way that's like authentic to your experience, not based on like transactional relationships, not based on like, we're going to work together on this one proposal and then never again. And I think it's we've really seen that fostering connections across the community. So it's been really nice. I'm curious, Allison, from your perspective coming into this, like the last few months and really helping out, if there's anything that you'd add about kind of the benefits of it.
Sure. Thanks, Whitney. And hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Allison LeFew, and I've been working in the kind of international development space for about 20 years. I live in North Carolina, worked for RTI for almost 13 years, and then branched out and was leading business development for a woman-owned small business. I lasted about 9 months, hit kind of burnout last year in June. And it really kind of took me several months of really processing just everything that had been going on in the last couple of years, and really rekindle my desire to be working in this industry. And I will genuinely say that coming across Bid Boss and recognizing that not alone in this space in terms of it can be exhausting, but also just completely exhilarating and a huge part of your identity, when you've, so as I started working as an actual consultant with a number of different clients of Bid Boss, Whitney and Sarah Jane invited me to also participate in the the small team and solo teams peer support group. And, as Whitney said, it's just to be able to come together with a group of colleagues that are going through a lot of, similar things. They have sometimes, kind of it's an opportunity for crowd coaching and support and real just camaraderie. Like we're rooting for it. You can feel like people are actually cheering for you. And that just really played to what I wanted to do differently about kind of re-entering the workforce and in this space, whether, as a consultant, you have kind of unique relationships with your clients, but I also wanted to really feel part of a collective community. And so this, to me, I was like, gosh, I would have loved to have this type of support when I was in the situation, a year ago this time, essentially, where it's just some days are harder than others. And some days you just need to know how somebody else has handled this kind of situation. Or if you have, let's say there's just like a clause in a RFP or something like that you don't really understand. And there's not really anybody in your own organization necessarily to go to with that. Those are examples of some of the things that, participants have brought into for discussion. And that's kind of been my experience. And I think it's rewarding to feel like you're also supporting other people when you're, that you have something to give to the community as well as, and then, pull from the peer support.
Thanks, Allison. Yeah, I like that bit about like you have something to give too. I think sometimes we tend to minimize our own expertise and experience, and having that opportunity to kind of share what you know as well as learn from other folks is really valuable. So we have a couple of questions today that we can kind of get into and tackle. I actually am really enjoying one of them because it ties into what our kind of Clubhouse monthly topic has been. But I first wanted to kind of pause if anybody had any questions or anything, or just invite if you do have any other particular issues that you'd like to chat about today. All of these conversations are very much driven by the people in the cohort. So we want to answer the questions that are most pressing to y'all and kind of go from there. So feel free to drop questions in the chat, or we're a relatively small group, which is kind of the purpose of having multiple cohorts as well. So feel free to just unmute and ask a question if you would like to, or to join into the conversation as well. But if nobody that's actually on this live call has a question right off the top of your head, we can kind of dive into the first one that came up. I'm seeing a couple of shaking heads. So the question that I really wanted to talk about first was how you can help colleagues understand how much you can actually accomplish in like a day, a week, a month, a year. This has been constantly something that we've been struggling with, and something actually the Solo and Small Business Peer Support Network has been talking about a lot, because that idea of unreasonable expectations is such a challenge. And I'm curious, kind of from the folks on this call, if that resonates, if that's kind of been a similar experience. I don't know a business development team that's not hit with unreasonable expectations, but I'm curious what your experiences have been.
I'd love to hear what you mean by, and maybe there's multiple answers to this, but unreasonable expectations on the part of whom, like higher ups, boards, country programs. Yeah, because it comes from all sides, right?
It really does. That's part of it. I think this particular question was about kind of your colleagues within the organization, particularly coming from our solo and small business development teams. Like, I think the issue that they often run into is like, can they actually support multiple proposals at the same time when there's just like one human being and one set of hands around?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's say from our experience.
Basics. Yeah. Please.
Oh, go ahead.
Please.
Just quickly, I don't know if I'll answer or just open up more questions, but just I've been with IDE for 8 years in our business development team, and when it started, it was much smaller. We've grown to be larger now, but it's one of those things. It's as overwhelming as things were when it was a team of 1.5 or 2 people, and now maybe we're, I don't know, 5, 6 FTEs at any given time. It doesn't really get any easier. The demand seems to be endless, and so even as the team grows, it still seems overwhelming. Just one piece of this that I've been thinking about a lot lately is that because the business development process kind of touches all other departments, finance and operations and technical departments and such, because it's all part of the proposal, process, and because that's the beginning of a given program or project is the business development process. There's a lot of organizational challenges are identified at that point that may not be our responsibility to deal with, but because we're sort of the first line of it, we're the first ones bringing it up. There's often an assumption that we're responsible, or we are forced to take certain challenges on because we need to be able to do business development. But I'm always fighting to hold that line that, like, okay, well, dealing with overhead capture, has an implication on what we try to enforce for overhead rates with non-USG donors, because that's often more of a negotiation than it is with USG agreements. But it's not necessarily our responsibility to deal with our actual, say, overhead recovery when we're implementing, or the financial aspect of. But so I not to ramble, but that's one of the things that kind of makes our life harder, and where we have to continually negotiate with other departments to try to have other folks take responsibility for dealing with things that we're ultimately bringing up as challenges.
That makes a lot of sense. I remember running into that with kind of program quality questions too. And the challenge that especially I feel like sort of M&E systems and BD kind of fit together in that too, where if you're not building a strong enough evidence base, that becomes a problem for business development. But then is it the responsibility of business development to kind of enforce program design standards? Not really, depending on the organization, but that kind of scope creep does seem to get to be a challenge that you have to navigate and kind of decide where those lines are going to be. Yeah. Go ahead and jump in, Alden. I can see you thinking.
No, it's okay. The scope creep is interesting for me. I'm helping my organization work with US government. And so at the same time, trying to help them identify what they need to do with the US government, which in some ways identifies like basic vulnerabilities of management stuff they're not doing. And they're like, well, we don't want to do this and that just because of the US government, they don't give us that much money yet. And I'm like, yes, but if you want me to get you any money from the US government, you got to do it. And by the way, it's not a bad idea anyway, for you to have this and that control. And, because I think I work mostly with Europeans who think the US government systems are difficult. They're not actually just difficult, they're rigorous, but kind of basic, there's a lot of them, but it's not unreasonable. And once you know them, it's not hard, You were asking earlier if the expectations could be unreasonable and what you could accomplish in a week or a month. And I think that is a challenge I have, because I work for an international organization. I work for international organizations. I work for an organization based in the UK, and they raise a lot of money from European donors and other types of donors. And there's just completely different systems from US government. So I'll be really proud and tell my boss that, like, we signed 3 pre-teaming agreements this week. And she's like, what does that mean? I'm like, it's great. I worked really hard. Maybe in a year, somebody's going to partner with us. And I negotiated it great. And she looks at me like I'm crazy. So it was nice to meet this team and understand that there might be a community of people who have a sense. Yes, my experience is that it is hard, because nobody at my organization even really understands what these processes are going to be like. And some people think, oh, well, 10 years ago, I worked on a USAID project once, or 10 years ago, I worked on a USAID project. They're like, yeah, I know it's slow. And I'm like, no, it's gotten slower. So that's also part of my job.
And more competitive.
Right. Yes, thanks.
Definitely on that one.
Thank you. I just need, you're nodding heads there, making my week.
No, hi, I'm Kara, also based in the DC area. I'm in the fun situation of moved back into the country, into DC, and 9 months later, COVID arrived. So by the time I got my feet under myself, the world shut down. So it was great to find this community of BD people. I spent years working on country teams as basically the solo BD person who taught themselves BD and then had to convince everyone else that it was actually important. And then we actually had to follow the donor's rules. Who knew? No one likes to follow directions. And then I moved back to DC, and I'm on Mercy Corps' global business development team, which brings a whole new fun set of challenges. Though what I've discovered in BD is having an amazing boss makes all the difference, because my boss is super careful to look out for some of these things and to be very honest with management about what we can do, understands when we say, okay, I just can't take on anymore, and really watches out for scope creep, which is something I'm very bad about watching out for, because I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. So that's made a huge difference in my stress level and my ability to actually focus and do my job.
Yeah. I'm curious, what kind of helps when you're trying to fight that? I think it's kind of all of our people pleasing natures, to push back against it and say, actually, I can't do all the things.
So actually, I've discovered that COVID has been good for me, and the fact that I just had to basically sit down and say, I can't do everything. And I just need to be radically honest in what I can do, what I can't do, what my expectations are, and what my job actually is in this process. But it's definitely been a learning process, and I learn things with each new one. But I just that actually speaking up for myself and saying, no, I can't take on anything else was hard. But doing it and having my boss encourage me to do that made a huge difference in my confidence to actually do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes a really big difference. I've also seen for some individuals that I feel like, especially I would say for like more junior staff that have a harder time, like they just have a harder time like estimating how long things are going to take. One of the big things that actually I know Sarah Jane did for a while with the team that she was on previously with what's now Chorus International, was to actually have some preset LOE estimates for like what different components of a proposal process actually take. And they were designed with the idea that like everybody that's on an organizational team has about 10 to 15, maybe 20 to 30% of their time that's eaten up by organizational responsibilities. And therefore taking on an additional proposal writing role that takes 75% of LOE is basically the only thing that they can do for the period where that proposal is live. And that's going to be their one focus. So having those kind of like benchmark figures of like a proposal writer is a 75% LOE role during the live proposal process, or a proposal manager is about 50%. That's going to take 50% of your time. And that means that you could maybe maintain some other things, but having those guidelines was really helpful with messaging to other people on the team, especially even when pulling in resources from other teams within the organization to say like, no, this is going to take you 50% of your time for the next 6 weeks. You need to commit that.
I want to jump in real quick I've been kind of just listening, but in half jumping in. I work with both Allison and Whitney with Bid Boss, but I wanted to validate whoever it was that said that their UK counterpart did not know what a pre-teaming agreement is. I work with a lot of European donors. They should know. So I just want to validate you there. They should know what that is. It is not a US thing. It is a global thing. Field teams usually generally know what they are. If they're, I mean, not every single person, but, definitely senior staff know what it is. And just want to validate you there.
Kind of. Thank you.
And I think it's that is a big accomplishment to have a pre-teaming agreement.
Thank you. That too.
So I just want to validate all those points.
3 in a week.
Slightly delayed because I was listening as I'm kind of doing some other things. Excuse me.
Yeah, appreciate it. I think different organizations have different ways of working. They don't work on too many competitive bids, period. And I think what's also new for them is just the timeline. So like a pre-teaming agreement for something that's coming out in September, like, why are you doing that now? I'm like, well, now, I think that's the other thing that's new for them. I think it's just
working with Europeans is so different from working with North Americans. It's different to translate your I should say European global teams. It's a different mentality.
Yeah.
To wrap your head around.
I should also disclose, because you mentioned the word translation. My organization is structured quite decentrally, and so the structure of the federation is a network of local partners, which is really, like, frankly, gold and very cool for USAID's new trends. And I think I have a cool job working with local partners and helping them engage with USAID. But something I need to get off my chest is just how, like, USAID is so keen on local partners, and the structures of our work is so unsuited to this stuff. So USG primes are sending my collaborators like NDAs. We got an NDA from a 3-lettered Beltway bandit I really shouldn't name, but the NDA was 6 pages long, and it was like wherefore and heretofore and blah blah blah, and they had it translated into their local language because they couldn't understand it, and the translator did such a bad job that they wouldn't sign it. And I tried to explain to them, like, it's just an NDA. Like, I understand this. It's not rocket science. They want to partner with you. They want to discuss partnering with you, but they need legally, they have to have this NDA. they didn't get it. And so we lost it, the whole thing. And everybody's disappointed. And I'm like, beating myself against the wall. But I gave feedback to the prime. I'm like, can you cool your jets with your 6-page complicated as hell NDA? Because that's not doing anybody any favors. But you mentioned translation, and I
my big question actually to them is, how are they going to enforce an NDA globally? Because now you're looking at different government legal systems. Okay, great. So they translated it because they didn't understand. Okay, an NDA, you can apply it in the US. You can say, okay, if these field teams ever travel to the US, which they probably won't do during the life of the NDA, they will not talk about, whatever it is that, the organization doesn't want them to talk about. But, while they're in the field, I don't know how they'd enforce that. So
exactly. I think it's, I really, every day I'm
antiquated.
How silly it is. I think that's one of the reasons that they didn't sign it, is because they said, this would be litigated in the state of North Carolina. And they're like, we're not going to pay for our lawyers to ever go to North Carolina. Like, this is a risk for us. I'm like, okay, yeah, really kind of, point. But like, please sign it. I can get you millions of dollars, but they wouldn't. So.
Actually, to tell you the truth, I'm not sure that they made the wrong decision there, because if they had to litigate something in North Carolina or whatever state they had to litigate it in, that would be such a headache. And, legal fees are so much more expensive in the US than the vast majority of other countries. So I'm not sure that they might have actually done a fairly adequate.
Of course, me and my job, I'm like, they're never going to sue you.
I don't know. But then again, on the other hand, it's not applicable. So I don't know. I mean, there's like different angles there that just.
Yeah, I feel like we always end up down a localization rabbit hole with conversations. That often happens. Davis, you had your hand up though.
I wanted to throw out there that, maybe not today, but I always love localization conversations, because I'm in the I'm taking up the mantle for my organization to really think about how we position in the localization space going forward. But Alden, I was curious to hear just a tiny bit more from you around what that looks like kind of organizationally, administratively, like whether those local organizations you're talking about, are they actually like independent NGOs in a way that you work to support? You're shaking, nodding your head. Okay, because I think that's really interesting.
Dominate the conversation, but yes, and it's been tricky for me to figure out how to make money from it. I'm curious.
We don't have to talk about it now, but I'm really interested in like the logistics of that kind of model. I had a conversation with someone from Neuro International the other day, and that's how they set themselves up from the get-go, that each of their country offices was an independently registered NGO. The US entity works in support of them, but it's not overarching, right? And I think that's really interesting, particularly in light of the localization trends.
I welcome a follow-up conversation. I don't want to dominate, but it's a very tricky thing for me to try to figure out how like our local partners could buy TA from our global body.
Yeah.
Thinking donor from the other side of it. No, because I've worked recently with multiple federations and like trying to, as a prime, figure out how do these pieces all fit together. Okay, well, we have to contract with the US arm if it's USAID funding, but then actually all of their things are dealt with at the European office, so then they sub-grant to the European office, and then it gets sub-granted into the country. And like, how do you buy TA from the global team? Because that's honestly who we want with some of these. And it's a nightmare on the other side too, to like figure it out. And I'm trying to like explain to our compliance people what's going on and our finance people. And there are pros and cons to the federated structure. So I work for Mercy Corps, and we have country offices in the majority of the countries that we are in, but they're not separate entities for the most part. So it's a little bit easier of a flow, but that then some of them are considered under the new partnership initiative because of the way they're set up, but a lot aren't.
Like considered locally established, that particular classification.
especially because of the way some of them have to be set up according to the laws of that country, especially when you get into like a lot of the African countries. But yeah, I mean, it's its own challenge with them trying to figure out how to access. And I mean, I think the whole new partnership initiative funds as a whole are quite a tricky thing for people to unlock.
Yeah.
And so far, they're just going to like the same players who say, oh, we'll do a bunch of capacity building with local partners.
Yeah, there's so many caveats in those now around like exemptions and loopholes for the usual suspects.
Yeah.
Pass through grants or whatever, but I mean, definitely, capacity building from a business development perspective for local partners is also something that I think we're really kind of grappling with, and how we've even, would like to launch and are launching sort of a cohort around local partner capacity building in business development. But we're taking our time with it, because again, it's like, we don't want to, like, if we feel like USAID hasn't thought through all of it, its challenges, and we're just going to jump right in and, also try and do the same thing. But like, so we've been having conversations and just sort of learning about the various nuances between, what that would actually really look like in terms of building capacity. For what is it, for USAID grants specifically? That's already got kind of its own lane that many organizations are making money by doing that for, whereas I think we had in our mind just more of that, again, that kind of community and cross fertilization and, joint coaching, like even just hearing all of you kind of share your experiences and stuff. I hope that, you'll kind of come away feeling like, yeah, you learned something, and it's a way to continue to develop professionally.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious. I feel like this has been kind of a conversation with everybody that I've been talking to lately, but are you getting a lot of like extra pressure or kind of expectations from higher ups about what localization potentially means for business development outcomes? Not like localization is new, just to take that elephant out from behind the curtain or whatever.
I don't think the higher ups where I'm at know any more about localization than I do, so I'm more the one leading the charge on it.
Yeah.
Kind of what's happening with us is the NGO trap of a bunch of people are excited about it, and like a bunch of teams are running with it. And so who knows? Well, like we're supposed to be having a localization strategy at the global level, but then the technical support unit is talking about what it means to them at this, it's the usual trap that comes when one of these new ideas comes.
Old wine, new bottle.
Which is everybody's saying about USAID, from Forward to Journey of Self-Reliance to the current localization stuff. But I feel it's a different moment right now just because of the number of people in different types of entities like talking about it more globally, right? And it's all over DevEx, it's all over Bond, it's all over other donors speaking about it. So I'm wondering if folks have a sense of like, are we going to see something different this time as it actually changed? And then like, is all the talk going to manifest in something that's actually meaningful change? Because I think what everybody's talking about now is like how you actually put your money where your mouth is in terms of donors and making it feasible for local entities to actually implement development funding, given the current, operational compliance requirements around that.
Yep.
I feel like in global health, it's being written into bids. It's very clear that it's a competitive advantage if you are engaging local partners, committing to giving lots of money to local partners, etc. And so in my role supporting local partners, I am suffering a bit of a nightmare because our local partners are being bombarded by competitors who need them as a competitive advantage, and they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what an NDA is. So everybody and their mother is knocking on their door saying, and what's awkward is they need them for the engagement, they need them for the competitive positioning win. But even though everybody sort of knows local partners should be non-exclusive, it's such an advantage to them business-wise to have them exclusive that they sweet talk them into it, or they trick them into it. And that's a big part of what I'm dealing with. And I'm stuck a little myself, to be honest. Like in some countries we have wonderful local partners and I want them to be highly engaged in the design. So maybe they should be exclusive and they should pick a horse and race with that horse. And in other circumstances, I want them to get a piece of the pie and they should be non-exclusive with a bunch of parties that have a decent chance. So and it's nice to talk to you because I think you're people who probably get this more than anybody else I work with every day. It takes a lot of analysis to do the case-by-case basis, but I think case-by-case basis, different things make sense for me advising my collaborators. But it feels real shady to me when I realize that our local partners are being manipulated. It's tricky. But you read all the NPI stuff and USAID stuff, and they said, oh, they're going to expand local primes and they're going to build up local organizations to lead USAID work. But I feel like the mega money is subbing on mega projects. So for, in the global health world, they might be putting out like $1 to $4 million bids for 5 years for local partners only, like restricted eligibility. But the mega money is if we can get a big sub roll on $100 million bid. So, and that's where we're more subject to manipulation.
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge that we're kind of running into at this point.
I mean, I think, Alden, what you said is so true. It's really such a case-by-case basis. Back to your question, Dave. I mean, there's definitely countries, like I've worked on and off over the last couple of years with Kenya, and there are very good, very structured national and subnational level NGOs in Kenya that could tomorrow turn around and prime a USAID bid if they had the BD capacity to do it. And that mission's been very active in engaging with them and building and all of that. And then, you go to other countries where there's a crisis and like there might be a lot of NGOs, but none of them have done emergency response before. So having an NGO step in who says, okay, I've done emergency response, we can get the money and then we can teach you how to do emergency response so you can do this in the future, is what needs to happen there. So it's, it just comes down to like, each country and what the case is and what the capacity, is really within that country. And I will say the consistent thing I see across is just BD capacity and, the ability to know USAID rules, regs, and how to play their game with proposals, which is where the big US based or European based win out, is because we know that game.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I feel like there's so many different layers of educating other people that are really this piece of it. When we talk about like educating local partners about how this is supposed to work, when they're being taken advantage of, what is just par for the course and normal, and what isn't, educating like our colleagues about what's actually reasonable to be accomplished, what donors are actually expecting, what's going to work, what's not going to work in a specific context. Like all of this is just constantly trying to share information out that we've kind of gleaned over a long time. And this is a bit of a pet topic for me, but the idea of business development as a skill set being equally important to technical design is important to me. And I feel like it does not get enough credit within kind of the
I really
institution
agree with
and
that.
industry.
I agree with that so much, you know.
I actually had this sorry, Joelle, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that it's partially because they don't, you know, people that are tech TAs tend to not understand what proposal development people really do. But, you know, of course,
Complexity.
proposal development people have to have a sense of what every other person that's working that has any role in BD, you know, is doing, you know, even if you're the writer or you're some kind of support, you have to understand like how all the parts fit together. It just, you know, that's the job, you know. So I mean, I think some of it's, yeah, just like, you know, and then of course I had someone tell me once, and I think it might be true, although I haven't tested it myself. Someone told me once, if you find a technical advisor that can also write a proposal, this person is a unicorn. They basically don't exist. So like if, you know, so I was thinking about that and I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. And I haven't had a chance to really test that, but it does make a lot of sense, you know, in the scheme of things, you know, with, you know, TAs kind of get all the glory because they're supposed, you know, they're, you know, making the decisions on the technical design in a lot of cases. And as you get more, if you specialize in, you know, in certain areas of BD, you know, for example, you know, a lot of people pick up particular donors or particular, you know, like specifically they work on health, you know, and that's what they do. You start to get into territory where you can do technical design, you know, and but then you're not necessarily seen as someone who can do technical design because you're the BD person who just supports everything and doesn't have any ideas. That's the thing that I really stress. I really struggle with, I guess, as someone that does, you know. I like to say I have my hands in BD. I'm not necessarily just a BD professional, but that's my forward facing professional, you know. So.
No, I've been running into this issue a lot with director of programs, actually. There's been a host of recent country directors who hired technical experts as director of programs who don't know how to write proposals or don't know the proposal process. And then say, oh, but we don't have the capacity in country to do this $1 million. Okay, I'll preface this by saying my job is to work on the $5+ million proposals. I have done my share of 50, 100,000, 300,000 over the years. That is the one line I hold. I won't touch it if it's under $1 million now. Like that's my one line with this job. But it's like, if you don't have the capacity and you have a director of programs in your country to write a small proposal, there's something wrong. And we've been working a lot as the BD team because there's 7 of us total. We're supposed to be covering 40+ countries. And then there's a couple regional colleagues who are based in Africa and Asia. And it's just like, we can't touch everything. So we've been doing like lead writer cohorts where we'll have small groups and like go through a curriculum and then do a mentorship with them. And that's helped, but it's always amazing to me, like we put our global technical experts in there and it's amazing how many have never don't understand proposals too, and that's part of their job. And like, yeah, I mean, Whitney, you were saying the education and the managing sideways and the managing up of just like all of this takes so much time, so much effort, and isn't even really what we're supposed to be doing every single day.
Mhm.
Back to the European thing, I think a lot of my colleagues who do know something about proposals have worked on with other donors. And so they're obsessed with like doing the design and coming up with a logical framework. I'm like, no, we have the results framework. The work here is different. The work here is telling them how we're going to do it differently. The work here is selling ourselves as,
Mhm.
So it's just, it is a different mindset. And I mean, I've worked with other donors too, and I've had to come up with my own whatever logical frameworks, but I think that's another hurdle too.
Mhm.
Who is good at program design is different for different donors. And I think for USG, it's particularly different. It's the work is earlier, the work is, you have to come at it with a competitive angle. The work is about, different things.
The whole idea of really doing a very, rigorous SWOT analysis and recognizing that just because you work in this area does not mean and can do these activities doesn't necessarily mean you're the best to do them. You could be, but why and how? And that's the, just responding to the requirements is like the minimum. So I think that's like one of the challenges in kind of narrowing the sieve or whatever for particularly, at a local level where people are, maybe working on, this activity in this region or something like that. And it's, very specific as how to really kind of leverage and partner to be able to, collectively offer a more competitive solution. But yeah.
I absolutely agree that it's about changing the mindset and about how you're able to leverage the expertise that everyone on your team and either at a global level or at a regional level has to be able to pull into those types of development proposals and different documents, because that's something that we also, I think, struggle with sometimes where, someone comes with a very technical mindset, which is great. I mean, it brings so much information and so much to the project design, but it's also about translating that into something that's more engaging and something that's more digestible. And I think that's something that we tend to struggle with because we have so many people that focus on specific areas with their expertise and trying to find and align like a language that makes sense for the donors that we're reaching out to. And I think that's something that we're getting better at, but it's definitely a process that I think is always ongoing.
I mean, someone, I'm sorry, I forget who mentioned, the unicorn of the technical person who also has business development capacity. Does anybody have experience with BD structures that are integrated with technical teams? Because, and I'm saying this because we're thinking about sort of retooling our structure, and this ties back to sort of the original concept around like capacity and bandwidth and burnout and things like that, because particularly younger or more junior entry level folks on our team, associate and manager level, come into BD as a foot in the door, but ultimately want to get into more technical positions. And so trying to figure out how to let them scratch that technical itch and get exposure to that, while also sticking to the need to have, people in a BD coordination kind of function is something we're struggling with and always looking for new ways to do. So I would love to hear anybody's experience with sort of merging those two sides. And like one way to create those unicorns, I think, is to cultivate young professionals in that way to give them both BD and technical exposure.
I'll go ahead and say that I think that a lot of organizations grapple with this and flip-flop back and forth and have made continuous organizational like reorgs to basically either centralize BD so that you have this high quality standard, of this is what you would expect. For example, I mean, I can just say for RTI, they have 5 technical divisions. Should the BD people live within the management and the budget of that technical division, or should it be, external as a business partner support where you can have, specialized, just BD groomed talent access to, pricing support and HR, recruitment, all of that kind of thing. And I think they've played with both ways, and definitely, I think a kind of a blended approach of continuing to have, you need to have some ownership over business development, I think, within your technical division. Once you get to such a large organization, I mean, it's just too distant, I think, because you do want to have those people who are skilled in BD, but know the clients and the competitors and the partners in that technical domain. Ideally, I mean, they had also gone back and forth between regional kind of divisions versus technical divisions. And I was in RTI for over a decade, so I saw kind of the various different approaches. For a while, I worked on Asia region, and it was primarily health system strengthening, and then some really key population work with HIV. But that was a little bit more to do with the people who were technically leading for that division, and that's what they knew. And I guess I would encourage, at any organization to really incorporate business development as some aspect and participation in business development as part of any job description, because while it will be a larger, component of people who are dedicated BD professionals, I think, anybody, whether it's a program coordinator, should be contributing to doing budget, developing budgets and reviewing of the budget notes and things like that, as a way to also marry the program side with the proposal side and make sure that you're not, writing up a cost share plan that makes no sense when you're chief of party who you've only just recruited, and here you're saying, like, we're going to now put a hat on you that says you're our staff, and now you kind of lead this plan. Anyway, I guess I grew up under a model. I wouldn't call myself necessarily, like, I've always been shy about saying, like, oh, you're a technical expert in, HIV or HSS or whatever. I've done a lot of it but largely from a BD or a headquarters backstopping project management perspective. And progressive roles for people, I think, is always, a good thing. Get people writing capability statements, that should be part of, but the technical, like, that's the thing, is like we brand these things and people think, oh, I want to do technical work. There's writing a scope of work for a teaming agreement. If you can't do that as a, I mean, this is where I'm like talking to Alden about, you have people who don't even necessarily know what you should be putting in a teaming agreement. And you're like, you need to be able to write a technical scope of work. And that's something that a BD person can and should be able to do too. You kind of partner together in that space. Sorry, that was a little long-winded, but.
I came from Save the Children, and we had a very similar experience to what Allison was describing at RTI. You could have cut and pasted a lot of the sentences that she said. One of the issues that gets tricky, depending on where you put people, is who takes credit. Yes. So it was a little bit tricky, like you were saying, Allison, like, it changed over time, and I would say it changed over time, but it was often the technical divisions that had the fundraising targets. But we had to work with the BD people, and that got a little bit tricky about who was taking credit for wins and who was held accountable for losses.
Yeah, those incentive structures
leads to finger pointing, I think.
Yeah,
I just had a little bit of PTSD when you bring up the term taking credit. Fortunately, resolved, but that could be tough, especially when it's different divisions who have a sort of shared responsibility, but report up to different, heads at the organization, and those, too. Anyway, we're past that.
No, so yeah. I'll say, Mercy Corps has taken a bit of a different approach, and we're trying to figure out what will work. So a lot of the responsibility for business development, especially for smaller grants, falls onto country teams. And so some of them have added, either separate BD roles within the country team, usually combined with reporting and that type of thing, program quality, or a DOP who's strong in program development. At the larger level, which is typically the large USAID bids, my team is housed within our technical support unit. So we're actually a division of the technical support unit.
Mm-hmm.
And on the large bids, we'll have someone from my team as the team lead. And then we have been experimenting with bringing in and having a technical lead from the technical team and kind of partnering those two together. Sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. A lot of time comes down to personalities, work styles, how people work together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from my years of experience now doing BD full-time and not full-time is that people don't recognize BD as a technical skill set. Like, I am proudly a generalist, and I will say I know just enough about a various number of technical topics to get in trouble.
We're all like, yes.
But like, my ability to manage a proposal development process and to manage the relationships, the emotions, and like all of that, and get things done in such a short amount of time, evidently not everyone can do that.
Yep. You're also the unicorn. Yeah. I mean,
different kind of unicorn.
Until I went and led BD for that woman-owned small business, I actually had never worked like a total purely BD role since my very first job at like Chemonics in 2002. Other than that, I was really within the technical division as like, you know, a being groomed, you know, professional or whatever. And I just happened to always do proposal leadership, and go figure, it's a skill set. And if you're good at keeping people on, you know, and coordinating people, and you know enough to hopefully not get yourself in trouble, maybe hopefully keep other people out of trouble when it comes, but like
that's always the hope.
That is always the hope.
No, I was originally M&E, and then someone said, oh, you can write in English, so try this.
Let's get quick nuts and bolts question for Kara and Alden, coming from Mercy Corps and SAVE, maybe just to check an assumption of mine. I think of those two organizations as ones that have like huge amounts of general from unrestricted fundraising, you know, because that kind of public, you know, fundraising that both those organizations do. Are you all able to, and Eldon, I'm asking about your sort of past life at SAVE, this question, and then Mercy Corps, but are you all able to use general to hire dedicated BD professionals within your country teams, or is that a misplaced assumption and you all still struggle with that? Because for our part, it's like everybody is like at the country level is pretty much fully billable and does BD just on top of their like normal full-time roles for the most part.
I mean, that's typically why we fold it in with other positions, because fully funding out of Mercy Corps does not have enormous wells of unrestricted, we call it core funding.
Yeah.
At least compared to like Save the Children and CRS. CARE and
but the way they choose to use it, they use, you know, NICRA for BD, and they use their like child sponsorship stuff for totally other stuff. They will not contribute cash for a cost share, for example. They're like desperately, everybody always assumes that SAVE will bring cost share, and they're terrified of cost share because they don't have cash to contribute to it, not a penny.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so what we have is pots of money that come from NICRA. And now they've been devolved to like the regional level. So the regional director manages that pot of money. And when a country says, okay, we're going to go for this opportunity, they fill out the form and they put together a budget saying who's going to work on it, estimated number of hours, cost, for anything related to proposal development, assessments, etc. How accurate that is, how often that actually happens, whole other argument. But then that's charged to any consultants related to that is charged to the region, minus if my team is involved, in which then it comes from a pot of money managed by my boss. If you want to reach out in the Clubhouse and we can chat more about kind of
that'd be interesting.
how that all is managed or anything else.
Do some myth busting.
Yeah, I'd love some myth busting. The NICO thing's interesting
That would
too.
be
I
it.
think we've been doing better. We don't get a ton of general, but we've been increasing it. The other piece is USAID is business is like 15 to 25% of our business at any given time. So we're always struggling with other donors to capture, sufficient
all the
overhead.
indirect.
So
I mean, I'll say kind of the myth that we perpetually battle internally is that BD people pay for themselves.
Mhm.
Well, no,
Sort
they,
of,
I
but
mean,
we
that
don't
they
pay our own
don't pay,
salaries.
like it doesn't pay to invest in like BD people. And it's like constantly, and as soon as you get someone in a management leadership position who understands it, they're like, yeah, of course, like go pay the salary of one person and they'll pay for themselves 10 times over, instead of spending a bunch on consultants or, different things. So it's like, that's been a consistent fight. And I mean, I spent years working a full-time job on a country team, and at 4:30 or 5 p.m. I started writing proposals.
Yeah.
Because that's what paid my salary was, all of the programmatic stuff. And then, so it's a constant struggle that, to have BD actually seen as important.
Yep.
And someday.
Yeah, someday. This is actually usually the point in our conversations where I start writing down all the topics for our discussion next time, because we've come up with like 8 of them. And unfortunately, we're actually a few minutes over time. So I really appreciate everybody coming, kind of experiencing a bit of what these conversations are like. We often get into kind of the really nitty gritty of how we get things done, how things are structured, how things are set up, how we're actually operating and navigating these different challenges, which I just feel like is incredibly valuable, both for kind of our own validation that we're not insane, this is complicated and useful, but also just to take that information back to your organization and figure out what might be useful, what might help things run smoother next time, and really take that. So this has been really fun. It's been nice to have a different group of folks to chat with.
Yeah. And for regulars to just, keep a list of things or questions, or even like, I need some, come and coach me for a second on this, how, and kind of keep track of some of those things. Cause that is, a great use of this kind of forum, and, for any of us to also learn how to better support our peers and coach our peers around us. So that's something, Whitney's actually has been a certified coach, but like even in sitting and listening to her, sort of like those are skills that I would like to also just sort of learn, more, and how to, if and when I work in a team like that, I would like to be able to,
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here. I will pop up some directions for information on how to access these cohorts kind of going forward, and happy to answer any questions about that too. I think I might do like just more of a Q&A session about the groups in the coming weeks, just in case anybody has any other questions or wants to talk things through. Happy to do that.
Thanks so much, everybody. It's been great.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you
Good luck
all.
with proposal season, everyone.
Oh yeah, it's here.
Right. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.